Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me for the third year, as always, Stephen Young of RotoGrinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're previewing the Ambetter Health 400 at Atlanta Motor Speedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend, William Byron won his second consecutive Daytona 500 after sneaking by when a last lap crash caught up several of the leaders. That means William Byron claims his second straight Daytona 500 victory. Also, the second straight year Stevie and I gave out William Byron for the Daytona 500 as our victory lane pick. That's pretty unbelievable. 2 years in a row, William Byron is our victory lane pick. 2 years in a row, William Byron wins the Daytona 500. He finished ahead of Tyler Reddick in second. And Jimmie Johnson, yes, seven-time NASCAR Cup Series champion Jimmie Johnson finished third in this year's Daytona 500. Stevie, it was definitely an interesting race. Definitely, some controversy throughout the whole weekend. Just a lot of opinions on the race, on the week, on the track, on the style of racing, on pretty much everything. What are your thoughts on Daytona?
Well, William Byron won from like 7th or 8th. I know there's a lot of talk about like officiating this week, and we'll talk about that in a second. But William Byron won the race because he went 3 wide at like the perfect time. And like it doesn't matter when they threw the yellow flag or not. William Byron wins the race because he clearly got through the crash, and good for him. We got to remember not to bet him next year for the 500 because no one's ever won it 3 times in a row. So we have to make sure he's not our victory lane pick for the 500 next year. But
hey, if he's 25-1 next year, I'm still taking him.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's just wild that they kept. I was shocked by his line, and that's why we made him our victory lane pick last week.
Yeah.
Tyler Reddick, really good race. Jimmie Johnson ran a very interesting race. Like he went up and mixed it up a little bit at the front. I feel like he went up there and learned some stuff and then rode around in the back for like 100 laps. And then with like 25 to go, he's like, I'm going to try to go forward. And it was really cool to see Jimmie Johnson finish third. I mean, see Jimmie Johnson finish inside the top 10 is just cool. He obviously has a little left in the tank. It's speedway racing. It's drafting type of racetrack. It definitely closes the gap on like his experience in the car to everybody else's. I mean, the dude's a 7-time champion. He can drive a race car. So it was really cool to see him finish third. I thought the race overall was really good. I know there's been a lot of talk this week about like, is it fake racing? There's a lot of fuel saving. There's a lot of 3-wide racing. There's not a lot of moving. But I mean, if you go back and you watch the race, because I go to the 500, I'm watching it from pit road. I always go back and watch it on Monday. I went back and I watched, and I feel like there was more passing than a lot of people kind of are saying. So I thought the race overall was really good. But I mean, my biggest thing that I'm not even gonna go on a rant. I'm just gonna say, like, my biggest thing is I just want NASCAR to be consistent. We saw a caution come out at the duels that cost Eric Jones a duel win. They didn't throw the caution during the 500, and we had guys going up the racetrack and hitting the wall. I think don't throw the caution in the duel and throw it in the 500 more than anything else. But just be consistent. I mean, I think that's my biggest thing. Like, I love that they didn't throw the caution for Riley Herbst because he really didn't affect anybody. He got off the track and got back on there safely. Love the no caution there. Hate the no caution at the end of the race. Like, yeah, you want the race to finish under green. Way too unsafe in that wreck, in my opinion. And I mean, if you listen to Chris Buescher's like in-car audio that he posted on Twitter, like they just kind of assumed the caution was going to come out, and you're like, hey, they keeping it green, you got to keep going. So I just think it was very inconsistent calls. And if you're going to let them race, then why didn't you let them race at the duels? Because I mean, it's a small field. The caution happened right on the front stretch. At least let that happen. So that's my biggest thing from Daytona, was just the inconsistency in calls across multiple series and multiple races.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know why they didn't throw the caution in the Daytona 500s, because everybody told them to not throw the caution if we get to a late race spot there because of the Eric Jones situation. So
yeah,
NASCAR took a lot of heat for it in the duels, so they sided with what everybody wanted and didn't throw the caution. And I'm actually okay with that. I didn't think there needed to be a caution there. It's not like the rest of the field is going to come back around at that point. That's the last lap. And it was, kind of coming off 4, like into 3 off 4. And so there's not going to be any threats of like broadsiding somebody who's stopped on the track or anything like that. And you can already get the safety cars rolling even under green because they're not coming back around at speed. So to me, it's not as big a safety issue. I was okay with it, but I definitely understand also throwing the caution there. I think it could go both ways, but you're right. The Eric Jones one with Austin Cindric, that one was a little silly, but that's also why NASCAR decided not to throw the caution at the end of the Daytona 500 is because they took a lot of heat for it. So, I think I'm okay with it. I understand the inconsistency only because they didn't get the duels call right. If they gotten the duels call right, then it would have been more consistent, I guess. But I think there definitely needs to be clarity around what is and is not a late race, a last lap or a last half of the lap caution going forward. So we're on to Atlanta, and Atlanta is another drafting track, just like we saw at Daytona. Atlanta's a 1.5 mile track instead of a 2.5 or 2 2/3 mile track like Daytona and Talladega are. It's not as steeply banked as Daytona and Talladega, so produces a little bit different style racing. But what I really want to know, Stevie, is not yet with Atlanta, but what did we learn from Daytona that could be applied this weekend?
Ford still pushed better than everybody else. I mean, that's, the one thing that you just notice when you're watching it live or watching it back and you're looking at the data. Like, it didn't matter who was in front of a Ford, but if you had a Ford behind you, you could move forward. So I think that is a huge thing. For me, is just, hey, the Fords, if they work together, they're going to be untouchable again on Speedway racing this year. But that was the biggest thing for me. And I think Toyota closed the gap a little bit on Speedway speed because we saw a huge gap last year on how they were able to kind of get through the draft and run on these drafting tracks. And I think that we saw, between Briscoe, between Denny was up there at the end, Bell had speed, Gibbs had speed, Jimmy Johnson finished third, starting towards the back and working his way up towards the back.
Bubba won a stage.
Bubba won a stage. He won a duel. So, I think just overall, those are the two biggest things. But Ford being able to push the way that they can push is such a huge thing. Going into Atlanta, going back to Talladega, going back to Daytona, that's the biggest thing for me is what did we learn from Daytona? Ford still pushes better than everybody else.
Yeah, I didn't mean Bubba won a stage. I meant he won a duel.
Yeah.
But he was up there in one of the stages. He definitely was, and he was challenging for the lead in certain spots. You mentioned how Jimmy was racy. Like that first stage when we got through the rain caution and red flags, when we didn't have to fuel save, Jimmy was up there not fuel save and running towards the front. I thought that was really neat. So, Toyota definitely closed the gap with both Chevy and Ford. I think Ford is still clearly the class of the field in terms of super speedway racing. And I thought it was interesting, even looking like Cole Custer right at the end of the race there for Ford, he was pushing, right? And he was aggressively pushing. He and Christopher Bell, he was aggressively pushing Christopher Bell. I don't think he did anything wrong when he pushed Christopher Bell, other than Bell was really unstable taking a push. And late in the race, just with that late race aggression, Custer turned Bell, but it wasn't anything intentional. It looked a pretty square hit, honestly. But there was several times before that where Custer was pushing Bell and Bell nearly lost it. So it was just clear that those two cars didn't work well together, not necessarily from anything Custer did wrong. Just sometimes two cars, just one pushing the other, just doesn't work out. Maybe Bell didn't have enough rear grip or something like that. But I thought that was interesting because even Cole Custer could push like crazy. And Cole Custer was challenging for the win on the last lap, right? And I gave him out 75-1 on this podcast. I was feeling pretty good going into the final restart because Custer and Cindric had the front row. And then I also took Toyota winning manufacturer plus 300 a little bit later in the week on the weekend. And they had the second row. So I was like, okay, I got the front 4 cars. And then when they all started wrecking, I felt really bad because I was like, well, there goes all my cars. And then emerges from the chaos William Byron. So a lot of winning opportunity there. So feel pretty good about that Daytona 500. But yeah, you're right. I think Ford's still the class of the field as far as pushing. So I mentioned Atlanta, another drafting track, another, pack kind of racing track, but it is different from Daytona and Talladega. So, Stevie, we've had 6 races in the next gen era at Atlanta Motor Speedway with this kind of drafting style racing. And I do think the racing has evolved a little bit at Atlanta. So, talk about racing at Atlanta Motor Speedway.
It's fast. We go to Daytona and Talladega, and you kind of get a break because you get in these 3 wide drafting situations. You don't get that in Atlanta. You're running in this huge packet of Atlanta. You see a lot more single file racing. We saw a lot more 2 wide racing last year, and I think we'll see that more this year too. But it's such a weird and interesting position because it's so tough to kind of predict because it's just such a tough racetrack because of how it is. But yeah, I mean, you're always on, I think, is how I always kind of describe Atlanta to people that ask me about the new Atlanta, is like, you don't really get a break. You don't get that time where you get a second to take a break. You're always on anytime that the green flag is going. So the other thing that I find really interesting about Atlanta is the middle of the racetrack is the preferred groove of the racetrack. So we see the restarts kind of get wild because everybody wants to be in the middle of the racetrack, and it's usually I want to be low, I want to be high, but because of how this track is and being a 1.5 drafting style track, everybody wants to run middle. So those are my 2 things. I mean, the thing that I always tell people is you see crashes like you see at Daytona, Talladega, but cars don't get torn up as much, so you don't get as many DNFs as you do at Talladega and Daytona. But man, it's just fast. I mean, it's a 1.5 mile. They're running, in a drafting pack where they're 3 seconds from first to last. So it's a very, very fast and always on type of racetrack.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. The other thing, for me with Atlanta is track position. Track position, even more than Daytona, even more than Talladega, really matters because it is tight. It's a pretty tight pack. It's, it's hard to get 3 wide. You can. I mean, obviously, we saw the 3 wide finish last year in the first Atlanta race, but track position is even more important than it is at Daytona than it is at Talladega. And that kind of reflects, look at the winners we've had at Atlanta. I know it's only 6 races, but William Byron, Chase Elliott, Joey Logano twice, and William Byron again, and then Daniel Suarez. And Suarez has always been very good at Atlanta at this configuration. 6 races, 5 finishes of 10th or better. I mean, the other one, he was running inside the top 10 when he had his issues. So it seems to be kind of chalky near the top. So, it doesn't mean we can't get a long shot winner. It is a drafting style track, and we've seen close to long shot winners. Famously, Corey LaJoie got blocked by Chase Elliott for the win in Chase Elliott's Atlanta win. And LaJoie was at the time 200, 250 to 1. Those odds definitely are not available these days as books have learned more about Atlanta. But, certainly we can get some long shots. But I do think it lends itself to being a little more chalky than, Daytona 500 than Talladega, where you really can get some long shot winners, especially Daytona. So you don't want to kind of spray the long shots quite as much, do you, Stevie?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the 6 winners. Logano's won twice, Byron's won twice, Chase Elliott's won, and Daniel Suarez won. So, Daniel Suarez has figured this new Atlanta track out, and we'll talk about that more as we're going through our picks and stuff. But, I mean, 5 of those 6 wins are, 3 really good. I mean, William Byron has back-to-back 500 wins. Joey Logano is a multiple super speedway race winner. Chase Elliott's really good on super speedways. It's the cream of the crop so far when we're looking at these drafting tracks. Even in the 3 wide finish that Suarez won last year, it was Blaney and Kyle Busch right there, 2 of the better super speedway racers. So yeah, it's different in Daytona and Talladega in that aspect because speed matters a little bit more here. Handling of the car matters a little bit more here than it does at Daytona and Talladega. So yeah, I mean, I don't mind taking maybe some long shot top 10 bets, but race winner type bets, I'm going to take, good drafting speedway racers that are aggressive and good pit crews. I mean, pit crew and pit strategy and stuff is how you're going to gain positions here as well.
Yeah, I agree with all that. One other thing that I thought was interesting, and this kind of goes into like my intangibles. Atlanta's changing. It is a track that, remember when it first was configured into what we call a quad oval years and years and years ago. Man, there was some super fast racing, a lot of grip. You could run a lot of grooves, and then it aged really quickly and turned into a high tire wear track. You could still run lots of grooves, but you were more on eggshells, tiptoeing around. Well, Stevie, I was pulling up green flag speeds, and we've seen this track age really quickly already. The green flag speed in 2022 in the very first race was in the 183, 184 mile an hour range. Then, the second year is 181, 182 range. Last year, 179, 180 range for green flag speed. So we're probably going to continue to see Atlanta wear a little bit, and I think that'll affect the racing in both unknown ways, but possibly good ways, just because it'll, like you said, means the car and the driver could matter even more.
Yes. I mean, I really don't have much to add. I think if we're going to get Atlanta, high tire wear Atlanta was one of my favorite racetracks because
Absolutely.
it was a driver's racetrack. So if we can get some tire wear here, like we're seeing it at Daytona now. Like Daytona is starting to age too, and we're seeing like handling matter a little bit more. But I think like if handling matters at Atlanta and we're not just getting single file running around the middle of the racetrack, like we're going to see some really awesome, and we have already seen some really awesome races. Do I prefer the old Atlanta? I do, but I think this race is entertaining. But yeah, I mean, I think anything that can kind of age the racetrack a little bit. And I think a little bit of the numbers last year, we see way more fuel savings than we do now with this new car and
That's
over
fair.
the last year and a half. But I do agree with you. I don't think like 2 miles an hour is not just fuel. I think a lot of that has to do with like the track wearing and handling coming in way more, and put it in the driver's hands. I mean, I think that is a huge thing.
Yeah, for sure. So that is our Atlanta Motor Speedway Ambetter Health 400 preview. It is time to dive into the bets. We are once again going to the new format this year. We're going to go through the race stage by stage. Stevie and I'll give a pick each in stage 1. I'll pick each in stage 2. That's a little bit longer in odds. And finally, we'll race through stage 3 and end up in victory lane with our combined favorite bet so far in, the middle of the week here for this race. So it's time to throw the green flag on the Ambetter Health 400 and fire off for stage 1. Stage 1, Stevie. Still getting used to that a little bit. What do you got for us in your first pick here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go to that guy that I was just kind of talking about, Daniel Suarez, for a top 10 here, plus 105. I say that I don't know if I want to bet him to win or not, but I think I'm going to end up betting him to win the race too. But it's more of, I mean, just kind of look at the numbers for him. 5 top 10s in the 6 new Atlanta races. 4 of those have been top 5 finishes. He finished first and second here last year. He's top 10 in quality passes. Like, not even like joking around, but like Suarez has definitely figured something out at Atlanta with this package, with this car, and he's just consistently running and finishing up front. I mean, all the statistics like him a lot. If I take out a couple things in my model where I like compare some racetracks and I just look at Atlanta data for him, he's one of the top 5 in my model here. I mean, just everything lining up for him. I mean, so Suarez has figured something out here. And the fact that I'm getting his his top 10 at plus money, I'm in. So probably end up, throwing a quarter unit on betting him at 20-1 to win the race too, just because I really like the data for him. So, but my pick here for stage 1 is Daniel Suarez top 10 plus 105.
Yeah, I like that. Here's the other thing about Daniel Suarez, right, is his team, Trackhouse Racing, has been very good at Atlanta as well. So not just Suarez, but Ross Chastain's found himself up front a couple times here. I believe Chastain blew a tire in that very first Atlanta race while he was leading. A few drivers had tire issues while leading or near leading in that very first Atlanta race. Now, I don't think we'll have those tire issues since we've had multiple races at Atlanta now, but you get the idea. Chastain, Suarez, both drivers that have found themselves at the front consistently at New Atlanta, which makes Daniel Suarez top 10 plus 105 very enticing. So that is Stevie's stage 1 pick. For my stage 1 pick, this is the biggest value in my model this week, and that's on Alex Bowman. So I'm going to go with a little Alex Bowman ladder, if you will. I'm going to take him for a top 5 finish at 4-1. You can get that ESPN or FanDuel. And then top 3, you can, size down a little bit there and take him 9-1 at FanDuel. And then I also took him for the win at 30-1. FanDuel and Circa have that at 30-1, at least when we're recording this on Wednesday night. So for me, Alex Bowman, he runs almost just as well as his Hendrick Motor Speedway teammates at drafting tracks, Daytona, Talladega, Atlanta. He's run really well at all of them and has been in the mix with his teammates. He doesn't quite lead as much, but he still runs toward the front, and he found himself up toward the front there with Byron as those other guys were in front of them going for the win. Unfortunately for Bowman, he kind of got freight trained a little bit. If you watch, for example, the Chase Briscoe on board, Briscoe makes a dive underneath them and Bowman fell back a little bit. And then once that wreck happened, Bowman still ended up claiming a 6th place finish, but he was running ahead of Chase Briscoe, and Briscoe was, along with kind of Cole Custer, came together to create that final wreck there. So Bowman was in the mix on those final couple restarts there, going for that Daytona 500 win. And if we look at drafting races since the beginning of 2023, so let's take out that first year of the next gen car as these teams started to learn more, Alex Bowman has 6 finishes of 6th or better in the 13 drafting races he has run since 2023. So nearly half the time he has finished 6th or better, and that's unbelievable for drafting races. So he's always finding himself in position, and Atlanta, specifically the most recent Atlanta race, he had the number 1 average running position in that second Atlanta race last year. The average running position was 5.27. That's really darn close to the front. There's not many races where, even at like normal mile and a halfs, where the top driver has an average running position of 5.27 occasionally, but not that often, let alone at a drafting track. He ran 100% of the laps in that race inside the top 15, ended up finishing 5th. So I think he's just a little underrated when he compares to his Hendrick Motorsports teammates, and especially at a drafting track where things are a lot more equalized, and that's open up value on him because all his teammates are 20-1 or better to win the race, and yet he's sitting here at 30-1, nearly just as good as these guys.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the 7 drafting tracks since the start of last year, it is the second best average finish behind William Byron. And then all the data that you talked about last year in the second Atlanta race, I mean, it was really Penske and Hendrick just class of the field last year for almost that whole entire race, with Logano winning it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I bet his top 10. I might have to add like his top 5 as well, but I'm right with you on Alex Bowman. I like him a lot.
Yeah, I definitely. And here's the thing about Alex Bowman for me. I do like that top 10 as well. I just think you need to be a little price sensitive there and make sure you get it with closer to a 2 than a 1. And, you could still be in the ones. I just think you need to be above like plus 150 at least to grab his top 10. But the other thing is, Bowman's not a guy that goes out and lead, as I talked about, which is why I really want to grab this top 3 and top 5. My favorite of these bets is the top 5 because it gives you that cushion instead of winning, which I do think you can sprinkle at 30-1. But I definitely invest more heavily in the top 5, a little bit in the top 3 and in the win. But that's why I like this as a ladder. I think my favorite of these bets is the top 5 on Alex Bowman because he often finds himself near the front, but not at the front. So that's why I went with this kind of position here on Alex Bowman. So we have run through stage 1. We took the green and white checkered, refueling up here, and then we'll fire off for stage 2. Second stage, Stevie, second pick for you. What do you have here?
So I was looking through my bets that I had made for some outright bets here early in the week, and I just kept noticing something. A lot of them were odd number race cars. So I went ahead and fired at the number of race winner odd plus 105 and wanted to add that to our show here. So, I mean, Kyle Larson, Daniel Suarez, Chris Buescher, Bubba Wallace, some of the names that I've bet, that we've talked about. You get Chase Elliott, you get Denny Hamlin, you get those Trackhouse guys
Chastain.
that we were
Yep.
talking about.
Yeah.
Like, I was just looking at the data. I was like, man, if I can just beat the 2 Penske or 3 Penske cars, because I think that's your biggest hurdle as far as the even numbers is beating those 3 Penske cars. They've been really good, and William Byron. So I do think like odd should probably be the dog here, and I probably wanted it closer to like plus 115. But hey, I live in Florida, so I have one opportunity, and I like it enough where I'm going to take it at plus money here. So. I was just looking at I was even a few minutes ago just looking at the data from even last year's second race, and I was like, man, I feel really good about this bet. And like, yeah, I mean, a lot of the drivers I like this week that I've already bet outrights on were odds. So I was like, hey, I'm gonna roll out an odd bet too, and double down on some of those drivers in a different kind of way.
Yeah, Chris Buescher, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Eric Jones, all odd number cars that have won at drafting tracks as well that I don't even necessarily think you mentioned. So a lot of good odd numbered race car drivers. And hey, Corey LaJoie's in the field in the 01 as an odd number. He's nearly won this race. I legitimately don't think you can count out that as a potential race winning car. He found himself up front at the Daytona 500 in the last couple restarts, right?
He was aggressive, that's for sure.
Yeah, Cole Custer. I mean, and that, we haven't even mentioned the Spire cars. I don't know, they didn't look so great in the Daytona 500, but we know Michael McDowell and Justin Haley are both very capable drafting track drivers. So, yeah, there might be a little bit something to this odd numbered thing you got here. So, odd number race winner at plus 105 for Stevie is his stage 2 pick. My stage 2 pick, I'm going to another ladder, but this one's a little bit of a longer shot ladder than Bowman. And I'm going to go with an odd numbered car, Stevie. And I'm going to take Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Full ladder, baby. Top 10. You can get plus 2. Pretty much all the best odds on Ricky Stenhouse Jr. At the time of recording is Bet 365, but there's a lot of near close to the same odds at a lot of other books as well. But top 10 plus 250, top 5 8 to 1, top 3 16 to 1, and to win 50 to 1. You can also find 50 at Circa if you're in one of the few Circa states. We love Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at drafting track, Stevie. Obviously, 3-time drafting track winner. And if we look at Atlanta specifically, he's actually been very good here. His average finish is 11.8 in 4 non-DNF Atlanta races. That also happens to be the 4 most recent Atlanta races. And that includes finishes of 6th and 10th. So definitely finishing toward the front, inside the top 10, near the top 5. And in the 2 DNF races, they both came in 2022. In the first one, he wrecked while, near the lead with a blown tire. He led 22 laps in that first Atlanta race. And then he's led at least a lap in 4 of 6 Atlanta races. So this is a guy that finds himself at the front. Speaking of finding himself at the front, he found himself near the front at the the waning moments of the Daytona 500. It was around 20 to go or so when put a little bit of a block on Joey Logano, and Joey Logano kept trying to stuff his car in that hole there that didn't exist. And I think most of the blame ended up on Logano from various drivers and things like that. But Stenhouse did throw a little bit of a block as well. But the idea isn't who's to blame here. The idea is that Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was finding himself up front, being aggressive, trying to keep others from the lead. And that's what he does at these drafting tracks, because he knows this is one of his best tickets into the playoffs here. And if we just go back to the most recent Atlanta race, he had the 13th best average running position, which has been the best of his 6 Atlanta races so far. So if anything, he may be even improving more and more at Atlanta. So I'm going to go Ricky Stenhouse Jr. full ladder here. I have him as around the 16th best car in my model, somewhere in that, kind of perfectly mid-pack range, but he's getting closer to like a low 20s price in terms of the odds board.
Yeah, I think the thing that we talk about all the time when it comes to drafting style tracks like this one is you have to be aggressive and you have to be selfish, and he's a one-car team. And he is one of the most aggressive, most selfish drivers in
Yes.
NASCAR. And I mean, that's good and bad. I mean, that's what you want, right? Like you're betting this at 50-1, saying, "Hey, I'm betting on a guy that has the ability. He's shown the ability to win these races." So yeah, I mean, overall, I never hate Stidhouse on any drafting track. So I definitely don't hate this one.
Yeah, and he's an upside player, right? He has massive downside too because he can wreck at any moment. But he's also an upside play because at these types of races he has plenty of upside. So that's stage 2. Stevie, for stage 3, we don't have a pick in stage 3. We always drive into victory lane, but I did want to pick your brain a little bit just as far as the odds board. We talked about the Bowman, Stenhouse picks, odd numbered cars, but just like Daytona. So I talked about Daytona. I had a hard time betting anybody under 18, 16-1. I wouldn't have such a hard time betting on anybody under 16 necessarily for this race, but I think the odds board at the top of the board, Stevie, is very accurate. You've got the 3 Penske cars. You've got those top 2 Hendrick cars in terms of Byron and Elliott, and you've got Kyle Busch. And to me, those are the 6 best cars. So I'm kind of in line with the top of the leaderboard there. So that's why we're not really taking any super short guys.
Yeah, I was really hoping that we would get some really like 20-1 type numbers on Austin Cindric, because I was gonna jump on that like as soon as it was posted. And I know like BetMGM has a couple really interesting like longer odds for some of these like favorites. I know you can get Byron over there and Elliott for like 17-1. But yeah, I mean, you have to agree with like Penske being the top. I mean, they've just shown so much speed and so much ability to hold the lead on these types of racetracks that, yeah, I mean, if I was going to bet a favorite, I'd probably bet Blaney at like 10-1, but it's really hard still to pull the trigger on that. And like, we'll think back on Sunday and be like, man, we probably should have bet Blaney 10-1 after we watch him like control the field. So, yeah, I mean, if I was going to bet, I don't know if I'd even just bet one of them. I'd probably take all 3 of them at like 10-1 and try to kind of circle it out somehow where I'm not really betting any other outrights, and just hope that like one of the favorite 3 cars wins.
Yeah, well, I think there is a way to do that, and that's with our victory lane pick. So you kind of alluded to it there, but instead of just getting those 3 Penskes, we're going to get more than the Penskes with our bet, aren't we, Stevie?
Yeah, victory lane. We're gonna try to make it 2 for 2 to start the season. We got the William Byron pick last week. Shout out to us. Winning manufacturer Ford plus 150. We're gonna ride this Ford train. I bet this last week at plus 160 for Daytona, and I was watching the race. I was like, man, I feel really good about this bet. And it's the end of Daytona. I mean, I really thought we were gonna get the Cole Custer Ford double takedown there, the way that Custer was running the end of that race. But I mean, if we look at the Ford side on just qualifying, they've dominated the drafting style track since the start of last season. And, Briscoe got the huge fine and penalty today for messing with the spoiler. So how much did that affect qualifying? And how did they not catch it kind of thing? But, that would have been another Ford domination of qualifying. And we expect them to qualify really well here. This weekend in Atlanta, 3 of the top 5 best average running positions, 3 of the top 5 best driver ratings. Like, Ford is really strong. Penske is really good. And Penske drivers are very, very good at working together and being selfless. I mean, Cindric will push Blaney will push Cindric, and Logano will push both of them, and they'll push Logano. I mean, they are all about winning together. And it's such a beautiful thing for old NASCAR fans to watch this kind of stuff, because it's just not something you see anymore. I mean, do we really think like Chase Elliott is going to push William Byron to a win? Maybe, but I know I have faith in like Blaney pushing Cindric until the end of turn 4 and trying to pass him, where one of them would win kind of situation. So, yeah, I mean, I like this bet a lot. Winning manufacturer Ford plus 150.
Yeah, I full disclosure, I've not bet this yet myself. This is like more lean-ish for me, but I do think if you are going to bet this, just because I haven't bet a lot of, I've only bet Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Alex Bowman so far, but I definitely would lean towards Ford winning manufacturer plus 150. And I agree with you. I mean, Penske's going to be strong, and then you always got the RFK cars. You know, throw Ryan Preece into the mix. Ryan Preece ran an interesting Daytona 500. He obviously got caught up in that big wreck there where he got airborne, but again, it was because he was running towards the front, and the front is where the wrecks happened in this race in the closing laps there. So, you know, the RFK cars are going to be really strong, and the front row motorsports cars have been strong here. I mean, Todd Gilliland led the most laps at Atlanta in the most recent Atlanta race. So you got a whole bunch of good cars there with your RFKs, your Penske's, your front row motorsports. Don't forget about Josh Berry. Don't forget about Cole Custer, that kind of thing. So, hey, don't look. Corey LaJoie is an addition to this Ford camp that can win this race as well. And I'm looking at it, and I just go down the Ford list. And the only Ford that probably really doesn't have a shot at winning is Cody Ware. But there are 13 Fords listed in this race, and I think 12 of those 13 could legitimately win this race. So, I definitely like Ford plus 150 as the most likely manufacturer, and they're a little bit longer odds than the Chevys. So I'm right there with you on that one. So that is going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to the Ambetter Health 400 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's Motorsports Betting Podcast. If you'd like to tail some of the bets we discussed today, look for the quick slip links in the podcast and video description, or go to actionnetwork.com/bet now. We'll be back next week to talk bets for the Echo Park Automotive Grand Prix at Circuit of the Americas. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.